Welcome to the Win, Make, Give podcast. Chad Hyams here, and wow, I just want to tell you, we have an interview coming for you that, wow, is all I can say now. And I have my Kleenex beside me because I have this feeling, not only do I need my pen and my note paper for taking notes, I think I might need Kleenex as well, as our founder, Ben Kinney, stumbled upon your story. And I'll be introducing you to who our guest is in a moment. And what a powerful story with powerful, powerful lessons that have come through this experience. And wow, folks, we're going to be sharing so much with you today. So with no further ado, I want to introduce you to today's guest. This is Linda Olson. And Linda, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
I think it's going to be ours when this is over and done with. Linda, I don't like to introduce our guests because I like to let our guests introduce themselves by, whatever really matters most to them. So why don't you take a moment and tell the Win, Make, Give audience, who is Linda Olson?
Well, that's a good question. Since our interview today is about story, I'm sure you'll find out more about me through the interview. But I am a TEDx speaker, have written 3 best-selling books, and am a story expert. I help people find, create, and tell their story. I've also founded a program called Wealth Through Stories, and my mission is to impact 1 million people a year through story.
Wow. And folks, I can tell you that you are going to be impacted by Linda's story today. Linda, you are so much more than that introduction. After we've done our research and had our opportunity to connect with you, and I've had my opportunity to scan myself through your book that you're actually updated one of your books, which is about to be re-released, correct?
Actually, Transform Your Story was released in June, yes.
Perfect. Okay, so it was just released not too long ago. So Transform Your Story by Linda Olson. Go check it out. I was able to scan through it and wow, some powerful stuff. So Linda, you said it's all about story. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, but how about sharing your story? Because wow.
Well, I would be happy to. My story goes back many, many years. When I was 14 years of age, through a tractor accident, my precious little 2-year-old brother was killed. I was the one driving the tractor. So in a nutshell, that's where it all began. And I'm sure, as you can only imagine, my whole world came crashing down. I mean, usually 14 years of age is not a fun age for most people. And my life, I grew up in the prairie provinces, Midwest Canada. And
Yay, Canada.
my life was pretty simple and, just a good old country girl. But, I was enjoying life. But that particular day, my whole world came crashing down. And it took a long time to basically get on top of things and really begin living again.
I would think so. So, Linda, here you are, you're 14 years old. You're going through the challenges that just any 14-year-old person is doing, and then in a small town on top of it, and all of that's happening for you. You're having those experiences that many of us might be able to remember, or maybe we have children that are going through that. And then on top of it, this horrific experience of you doing your job on the farm to help out, that creates this horrid accident with your little brother.
Yes.
How does that? I mean, that's got to change you forever. I mean, I can't imagine that changes you forever. So it's probably changed you in different stages over different times. What was the immediate impact for that next year, 6 months, whatever it was at first, as the shock was still setting in, what was that like?
Well, at that point, we were all just trying to survive because even though, I crushed my little brother, the thing is, I crushed the entire family.
Oh,
My parents were um, just trying to hang in there. I had another brother and two other sisters, and I have to tell you, communication to begin with wasn't really that good in our family. So everyone now basically withdrew and no one talked about. And, in times like this, the more you understand about grief, and I learned a lot about grief over the many years, and especially as I became a marriage and family therapist. But at that time, nobody especially in this little community, nobody understood grief. They didn't want to. They didn't want to bring up the accident to me, thinking it would trigger a lot of pain, and it would have. However, the best thing that could have happened was for me, as well as the family members, just to be able to talk about what happened. And so that was tough. It was really a matter of surviving at that point. And in fact, I'll tell you, I remember so clearly the very next morning, my big, strong dad came to my bedroom door, and I was just lying in bed and crying. And he said, "You've got to get up. We have to keep going." And that was the hardest thing I did, was literally that day just get out of bed, because I lay there and I'm thinking, why? Why get out of bed? What is there to live for? Family was very important to me. My little brother was just so precious, the joy of our life. And just like that, he was gone. And so it's kind of like, how do you keep going? And it literally was just putting one foot in front of the other to try and move forward.
oh, wow. And I'm sure there's some of our listeners right now who are just hitting pause on the recording before they move on. I'm sure there's some who are dealing with something in their world uh, at this moment of a loss or a challenge that they're really facing. And the message I just heard from that is just take that next step. And that's what you had to do. And that's how you started to at least move forward.
It's and in the world we live in today, especially what we have experienced this year, there are so many losses,
Mm.
and it's kind of like, well, what do you do? And yes, you have to keep going, and so it's really moving against what we feel like doing, and just literally putting one foot in front of the other to move forward, because that happens with any kind of crisis. It all starts there with the next step.
Okay, so Linda, I mean, guilt has to riddle you at this time, um, and everybody has something. Hopefully, not the same experience that you have had, but everybody has had something where they allow guilt to then take them over, whether it's for a short period of time or becomes a long, drawn on battle with guilt. Linda, how do you forgive yourself from something like that?
Well, that's a very big question, and I'll tell you, for me, I had buried that guilt so deep, I honestly didn't even know it was there anymore. And the best thing that happened was 15 years later, after the accident, as I had decided to go to graduate school in Southern California. And part of my graduate training, we were required to have 25 hours of personal counseling, 25 hours of group. So we would know what it's like to be in that other chair. And so I honestly thought at that point, I, for the most part, was doing well, enjoying life, but then there were just those times where I'd see a little blonde toddler and it was just like a knife went through me. I just wanted to almost buckle over and then I'd get past that and go on. But part of that was that guilt was still there and I didn't know it. And so when I decided, I thought, well, I'll get this requirement out of the way as quickly as I can. And so I asked around for a good counselor, and this one name kept coming up all the time. So I called her, and she said she had a waiting list, but if I was willing to wait, she would love to meet with me. And so I said yes. And about a month or two later, she gave me a call. I came in, and the very first day, she just asked me just to share briefly about my life, just kind of an overview. And as we got to, as I shared briefly about the accident, I made this statement and said, I don't think my parents have dealt with their pain. And she said, have you? And I said, I believe I have. And she said, what makes you think so? And I said, well, I was speaking at quite a few luncheons in the greater Vancouver area, and I could actually tell my story without tears. So surely that was evidence that I had worked through my pain. And then she said something I'll never forget. She said, when you're ready to work on this, we'll work on it together. And I thought, oh my goodness, what have I missed? But she was very discerning, a wonderful counselor, and she recognized my guilt in day one, something, like I said, I had put aside for so long. And several months later, it came up. I made a statement after watching a movie and had recognized this young boy's guilt as his best friend had drowned. And I said something, and she said, you're ready to work on this, aren't you? And I said, I think so. And so that day, she walked me through in slow motion that horrible, horrible day. And I sobbed from such depth, I didn't know if I'd ever recover. And then she said, when my session was over, she said, I don't want you to drive home like this. I have a separate waiting room. I would like you to wait there until you're ready to go home. And I said, okay. So I sat there, and when I calmed down, there was a message in my head, and it was like I was having this conversation in my head. And the first words were, has God forgiven you? And I said, yes. Then the next question was, have your parents forgiven you? And I said, I believe they have. And then the third question was what really hit me. It said, what keeps you from forgiving yourself? And I didn't have an answer. And as I sat there and just kept thinking, and I was like, wow, this was just going, so deep. And finally I got on my knees, and with God as my witness, I said, God, I cried out and I said, God, help me. Give me the courage to forgive myself. And when I got up, there was such a huge emotional load that was lifted. I didn't drive home that day. I flew home.
Wow. Okay, I'm here. I'm just taking a moment and processing. Wow, Linda, wow. Okay, so one, it's recognizing that even though we think maybe we've forgiven ourselves on something as you had thought you had, that really until we face it, we're not going to be able to move on from those guilt things that we just bury inside ourselves. Is that what I was hearing?
Absolutely. And the thing is, maybe emotionally, I wasn't ready to deal with this before, because that whole healing process it is a process. Somebody had described it to me as it's kind of like peeling an onion. Every layer has some tears until you get to the core. And I think it was the timing. It was the timing for me when I was emotionally ready to be able to deal with it. So that's when it came up.
Okay, now you have had other experiences in life, and hopefully none even close to the traumatic level of this childhood experience. Yet, what lesson did you learn from it for forgiving yourself continuing to move forward?
Well, it's kind of interesting, um, we all have our area that we are most vulnerable with, and for me, it's the area of guilt. So when something comes up, and it can be a simple everyday kind of thing, it's the guilt will be triggered immediately, and I have to just stop and take a look at this and say, no, I was responsible here. This is not my issue. Um, if it is, if I feel like I have a responsibility in whatever happened, maybe it was a breakdown in communication or something, um, I will be quick to call and let the person know that, if there's some hurt feelings, that I'm quick to forgive. But I realized it's a process. The first thing is we have to identify. We have to identify what that negative emotion is and name it the best we can. We have to name it. And secondly, we we have a choice. When that comes up, am I going to avoid it? Am I going to run from it? Am I going to try some way to escape it? Or am I going to face it? And of course, we always know the wisest thing to do is to face it, but that's easier said than done many times. And then just because we have made a choice, we doesn't mean that it's happened. We still have to take action. And so I discovered that in many times, as different things come up, not only the guilt area, but as different things come up, it's a simple process that I take myself through, and have trained many others with doing that. And then we can move forward, because there's nothing worse than getting stuck in our story.
Hmm. So, those three things again, for everybody out there. The first is we have to, I think the way you say it is identify the storm, right? So, we have to name that negative emotion that's there, whether it was guilt or anger or shame or whatever that feeling actually is identify it as we move through this process.
Yes.
So, I mean, I got to imagine, I guess, if we're being honest with ourselves, it's probably not difficult to actually realize, oh, I feel guilt, or I'm feeling shame, or I'm feeling anger at this time. What tips can you give us to help us as we identify this storm and we put a name on whatever it is?
Yeah, that sometimes is much harder than what we think. Some people obviously are much more in tune to their emotion. And, you think, well, if I had an outburst of anger, for example, you say, well, yes, of course I was angry. Um, and that might be part of it, but there may be something triggered that's much deeper than that. And the reason I got angry was because there was a fear that something I was afraid of addressing. And I got angry because I didn't want, somebody was coming close to that, and I didn't want to address it. So the fear triggered the anger.
Mm.
And
So
so
it's making sure we get to the root of this. It's not just might be that obvious response. It might be what's behind it.
right. And sometimes may not be aware of the root. So we have to deal with what we are aware of. And once we do that, then at times the deeper root will surface.
Okay. So then the second step on this, you said, was we had to make a choice. And obviously, you had said that we know we should face it. Yet, are there ever times where not facing it is the right choice?
Good question.
I do my best to come up with one every interview.
Yeah, yes, I see. um, I don't think that it's that. that we shouldn't face it, but it's more about the timing. Sometimes somebody isn't ready. For example, if it's a breakdown in a relationship, and maybe something is said, and we just want to get out there and deal with it now. And the other person isn't there. They need space to process it. They need, and so to me, it's more about that timing, and that we can let them know, this is something I really would like to address. If you can let me know when you're ready. If this is not good timing, I'm okay with that. But if you can let me know when you're ready, I would really like to talk about it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So facing it is obviously going to always end up being the response, yet maybe it's not at that moment for a logical reason, like you were just sharing of a relationship. We have to have both parties ready to be able to face this.
Yes,
Okay.
Yes, I believe that.
Okay, and then the third thing, so we're naming this emotion, we're choosing what we're going to do with this at the moment, and then the third one was very simple, and it sounds pretty self-explanatory, yet let's talk about it, and that's take action. What does that look like?
Well, you know what? It's probably different in each situation. That action may be, say we know we need to call somebody, or we need to apologize for something or whatever. Well, so often our pride gets in the way. And even though we know that's the right thing to do, it takes so much courage to actually make that phone call or meet with that person, because, unfortunately, I think it's part of avoiding it. So often we do so much through text right now. And, I've heard engagements broken up over text and things like that. And I'm thinking, really? You didn't care enough about that person to actually meet them in person, if that were possible, or if it was long distance, to give them a call and talk with them. And so to me, that yes, you are maybe addressing it, but to me, that's like an escape to do the text thing.
So you're taking action is actually, it's not just necessarily action, it's taking responsible action.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Because I'll tell you, a big part of all of this is about owning our story. And that's part of owning our story, is taking responsible action. That was very well said.
Okay. So folks, you're facing something, name that emotion, make the choice, and then take some responsible action. Don't just send someone a text message and move on with it. Now, I'm just going to take a deep breath here, and everybody listening to the podcast, take a deep breath and just let it out, because we're going to cleanse. Because, wow, Linda, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm sure it comes into play in everything, and we might reference it again, but wow, that's heartbreaking and a powerful thing. Yet it has led you, as we know, we always say, will we change things? And everybody says, yes, I would change this in my life, and I would change that in my life, or sure, I'd go back and buy Apple stock, or whatever it was, as we all say, if we could go back in time. Yet any change we would make in ourselves would change who we've become today. And you have now been able to impact so many people and help so many with this lesson of story. So I believe the way you say it is that your story is who you are, and your vision is what you do with who you are. Can you talk about that a little bit, that message in there about our story?
Absolutely. Everything we do in life really is based on who we are. And so that's why it's so important to take that ownership of whatever has happened. As you know, nobody has lived a perfect life, and we don't expect that. It is all about, addressing the pain, addressing the hurt, forgiving, and moving on. And as we do that, and we take that responsible action, then we can move forward to empower and embrace the vision, the dream, whatever it is before us. Because anything else will keep us stuck in the past. And as much as we try to do things on the outside, it doesn't happen until we deal with the inside.
Say that again.
As much as we try and do things on the outside, like move towards our dream. Somebody told me once, I was at a coaching training session, and this wise man said, he said, if you are not able to go forward with your dream, he said the best place to look at 85-90% of the time, it's because there is unforgiveness with one or both parents. Because that is where our story begins, and that is our foundation. And a lot of times we may not even realize it. And that was such an eye-opener for me when I learned that. And I thought about it a lot. And I thought, I think the guy's right on.
So we can blame our parents. It's all our parents' fault.
Absolutely.
Okay, got it. Good. So, Mom, if you're listening to this episode, don't worry, I'll blame Dad. Okay, so you have this powerful story. I mean, it's obvious, right? I mean, if someone were just sitting back and viewing your life as a movie, it would have been very obvious. There's Linda's story. And our founder, Ben, he tells his story all the time. It's not his favorite story to tell, as I'm sure yours is not your favorite story to tell. Yet he tells his story for the lessons that comes from his story. Not everybody has such an obvious story, Linda. So that just means they don't have a story, right?
Well, this may surprise some of our listeners, but I'll tell you, a few years prior to my complete healing, if somebody had asked me, what's your story? I probably would have said, I don't think I have one. And so the thing is, it's not that we don't have a story. I believe everyone has a story. It may not be this big and what seems obvious kind of thing, which is what I refer to as our signature story. But we all have stories in life. We all have overcome situations in life, or we wouldn't be where we are today. And sometimes we discount those stories. We think, well, if it's not some big tragedy or something, it really doesn't count. And I want to speak to the listener who may be thinking that way right now, because that's not the case at all. There's different levels of stories. I believe our life is made up of thousands, maybe millions of stories, because story unfolds every day. I believe there are little stories that unfold every day. Sometimes they're a piece of a bigger story. Then we have what I refer to as turning point stories. Those are events, circumstances in our life that perhaps changed our thinking, changed our lifestyle. It could be a move. It may have been marriage. It may have been our first child. It could be a promotion. It could be a relationship breakdown.
Well, there you go. I was gonna just jump in. I didn't want to stop you on your train. I was gonna say, isn't it amazing your mindset, Linda? Because you just gave me positive after positive after positive after positive, right? Marriage, birth of your first child, promotion, and I was sitting over here, and I'm a very positive person. Yet I was sitting over here going, well, what about the divorce? What about being fired from the job? Would those things also fit into that same category?
Absolutely. Because the most important part of story is conflict. Conflict, pain, problems. You can't, you think about any movie that you watch and how much conflict there is in the movie. It's through conflict that we identify with one another. And because we live in such a broken world today, that's how we connect. We actually connect more through conflict than anything else. And so even though there are those positive situations, like, it may be getting married and having a child, you know what? there's something about holding that child for the first time, and all of a sudden it hits you thinking, I am responsible for raising this child.
Yeah. That's
I
a
mean,
turning point story for me, that's for sure, when my daughter was born.
okay, there you go.
Yep.
Marriage might be the same thing, you know. So overall, it can seem like a real positive situation, and we often don't talk about, that turning point moment. So
So
it's
we've got
important.
signature stories. Those are those moments that, as I say, an outsider would say, your life just changed. And that can become your signature story. We've got those turning point moments, which might be shorter stories, or they might be just a big chapter in your story. Are there any other types of stories that we have going on in our day-to-day life and in our worlds?
Yes, I would refer to what I mentioned earlier, the everyday stories,
Mm-hmm.
and then the turning point stories, and then the big story would be what I refer to as a signature story.
Right.
Yes.
So how does somebody identify these? I mean, is it so they know? I mean, is that the sort of thing that, well, therapy is going to help you find those stories? Is that the sort of thing I should just go pull out my journal and just start writing? Because if it's a memory I still have today, there's probably more to it than just, oh, it was a happy day or it was a sad day. There's probably more to it. How does somebody identify the stories that are going on in their world so that they can, well, write their bestseller?
That's a very good question. I find
Oh, good.
journaling.
I got two in this podcast. That's awesome. I'm on a roll.
I can give you credit for much more. The journaling is very helpful for me. I do write a lot. I even write down. I At the end of every day. Now I'd like to say I was so disciplined I did it every day, but I do it most days, and that is just write down 10 things I'm grateful for today that happened today. And often those might trigger my everyday stories, they may be positive overall, or it may be what I learned from a conflict that came up. Or
Oh, I like that. So you might even be your grateful moment for the day might even just be a lesson that came from something that wasn't a highlight of your day at all.
exactly. Yes.
Okay, I want to also ask you this because a lot of our people that are in our audience are the type of people who do write down the 3 to 5, 10 in your case things they're grateful for every day, or maybe they don't write them but they think them or whatever that's going to be. And my wife, for example, she's something I'm grateful for every single day. I'm sure you're grateful for your husband in your life every single day. Do you allow that? I mean, I'm just getting nitpicky on it here. I mean, you could count him as one of the 10 things you're grateful for every day. Do you? Or are you challenging yourself to find 10 things that aren't just the thing that was also there yesterday?
Exactly, the latter. That I challenge myself and I challenge people that I teach this concept to write down 10 things, 10 specific things that are different from anything you've written down before. So then uh, I find myself looking at much more detail. It was a particular call I received. It may have been a text, what somebody said. Um, Being able to reach out to somebody, that kind of thing. Yes.
The opportunity to be on a wonderful podcast and share your message with so many might make your list tonight.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Exactly.
All right, good. So, folks, what I want our audience to hear out of that is a lot of people, they will say, well, here are the 5 things I'm grateful for, and they're going to write their spouse and their kids every day and that the sun came up or whatever those things are. And that's not the purpose of the exercise. It's not just to write those same things just to be able to say you did it. It's to actually reflect on the day previous or the day that's just ending or the opportunities that are ahead of you that aren't there every single day. Those are unique experiences. And that's what Linda's telling you here, to sit down and document those, because that's how you're going to figure out some of those everyday stories. And maybe even a turning point story might show up in one of those days when you're documenting this.
Yes, it is
Okay.
exactly that. And it is sometimes, um, for example, I have 5 adorable little grandkids, ages 2 to
Oh,
6. Yes. Absolutely adorable. And, often my best stories come from then. And so last week, here, let me give you an example. Last week, our daughter called and said they were just running errands, her and her husband and the two kids running errands. And the 5-year-old saw a homeless man. And he said, Dad, we need to buy something to feed this man. And he can get really persistent, and this time he was. And so, we see this on a regular basis. It's so easy to drive past, but Dad knew that he needed to stop. So he drove through a Carl's Jr. or whatever it was, picked up something, and it was a situation where they had to get out of the vehicle and walk across to hand the man this food. And so he went with his 5-year-old son. And as he came back in the car, little Micah says, everybody needs to have a full tummy, and brought his mom to tears.
Well, he's going to bring our whole audience to tears if everybody. Well, and that can absolutely, it could be an everyday story for someone, and that could become a turning point in, well, his mother or in his life moving forward, depending on how that sits with him.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yes.
That's beautiful, and what a wonderful grandson that you have there already leading with his heart. We love it. So,
he has a tender heart.
So now we're going to start to figure out our story. And we want our story because you tell us that there's 3 things that the power of story actually can bring us, which is connecting, impacting, and transforming. So walk me through this. I'm starting to figure out what my story is, and maybe I need an outsized source to practice telling my story to, or in your case, you told your story so many times until you were able to tell it. So it might be one of those stories that you can finally tell without the emotion that comes to it to help people. Yet the first thing is, the reason to have your story and know your story and put your story together is because it'll help you connect with people.
Yes, I believe that story, when told well, is the number one way we can connect with people. Because when I tell my story, there's a part of you experiences me. When I hear your story, I get to experience you. And it's through experience that we remember that more than anything else. And so how I like to simplify it, I like to give it's a basic, you can call it a guideline, you can call it a formula, whatever you want. But earlier I talked about every story has conflict. And you think about, if you go back to, what are conflicts in your life that you learned from, you, like I said, everybody's an overcomer, or we wouldn't be here today. And so something
That's
that
such a great statement you just made right there, Linda. Everybody's an overcomer because you're here.
Mhm.
If you're listening to this episode, you've overcome. Some people have overcome larger things than you and some less, yet you have overcome. So congratulations on making it here.
Absolutely. And the thing is, it's not about how big it is. It's really more about how big the lesson is that you learn through it. And so that's why I say everybody has a story, because there's some conflict that you were able to move past and something positive came out of it. So conflict is the number one ingredient of story. Mm-hmm. Behind every conflict is a resolution. And then if we go back, there's always that introduction. And that introduction introduces the conflict. So I believe that every story should be no longer than 2 minutes or a maximum of 3 minutes. And it has to do with our attention span is so short these days that we have to learn to hone in our story. And that is one of the biggest challenges. For me, My story to complete healing was a 45-year journey. And believe me, when the coach, I worked with a high-end coach for 3 years, and when she helped me hone my story into 2 minutes, I knew I'd found the power of story.
Okay. So, folks, can you tell your story in 2 to 3 minutes? Now, there's people out there, Linda, who are saying, well, I'm not a good storyteller. But everybody can tell their own story.
They can, but at the same time, to recognize, especially if we're using story in business or, an entrepreneurial situation or something, that it really is a skill. Or as a speaker, or as an author, workshop leader, webinar, whatever. Story is a skill, and until we learn that skill, there's usually a tendency to get caught up in all this detail because the detail is important to me. So I think it's important to you too. But for the listener, all they want to do is they want to get to the point of the story.
Okay.
And
So
so,
everyone doesn't have to be a motivational speaker to be able to tell a good story. And we're not saying that every story has to be up on a stage or printed in a book. You can tell a story in that elevator ride or in the boardroom or over a meal, yet there still needs to be the power in figuring out how to truly tell your story and make it that strong 2 to 3 minutes so that you can connect with people.
yes, and I'll tell you what the key to that is. It's really finding out the need of the person we're talking to, so that our story, the purpose of our story is not for us to tell our story. The purpose of our story is to connect, to come alongside, to identify with their need.
Because otherwise it's just therapy. If
Well,
we're just
yeah,
telling our story for the sake of telling our story. So you're saying we need it to connect. So
right,
we need to know their need so we know why we're telling the story that we've chosen to tell. Because we have more than one story. We need to know which is the right story for this situation.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And then once we've connected with them, the next thing I've heard you say is that connection then allows us to impact. So talk a little bit about the impact that comes from story.
Okay. Once we truly understand their need, and it may be really recognizing their pain. Part of understanding their pain is really drawing out often their story. Say we're at a networking meeting somebody for the first time, and of course the normal question is, and what do you do? And um, you can turn that question back to them and say, you know what, I'd love to tell you, but before I do, I'd really like to find out about you. Okay, most people are happy to talk about themselves.
Yes, they are.
And so they're just going on, and you can begin to, you're drawing out, they're telling you, probably giving you a job title or something like that. And you can take them further into their story by just saying, what's the most challenging thing you're facing this year? I mean, this has been a rough year for everybody. What's the biggest challenge for you? And just doing that, you are drawing out their story. So then at some point, they're going to say, hey, you know what? It's enough about me. I really want to hear about you too. And that's when they're turning around and asking about your story. Well, you have just impacted them enough, influenced them enough so that, and drawn out their story. Now they want to know about you as well. And that's a small way of knowing you've impacted somebody.
Mm. And I know from that as well, now I know how to answer the question if I'm looking to help them with a need. I mean, I have my stories of maybe a story with my daughter after the divorce that happened. And then I have a story where I used to be much heavier than I am today. And I can go in one direction or another direction. So I truly can move to that third step. So you say we connect, we impact. Now we can actually transform lives with story. Tell us more about how we can do that.
And that has to do with truly understanding their deeper need. So let me give you an example. Let's say I'm a financial planner. I have a young couple coming in, 30 years of age, are $100,000 in debt besides their mortgage, and have no idea how to get beyond this. And that's their story. And I thank them for the courage to trust me enough to come in and share their story. And at that point, and remember, they are my clients, so this is their time. And I might say, do you mind if I just took a minute to share my story with you? And of course, they're going to say, sure, go ahead. And so in literally a minute or two, I will say, when I was 14 years of age through a tractor accident, my precious little brother was killed. I was the one driving the tractor. I may not know what it's like to experience the guilt of being $100,000 in debt, but I do know what it's like to carry the debt of guilt. And if you will work with me and do what I ask you to do, in 2 years, I will have you out of debt. Would you be willing to do that?
Heck yeah. You're not even a financial planner, and I'm going to sign up now. I mean, you're absolutely right how you just connected and could transfer. You've connected, you've impacted, and you've just been given the power to transform me.
And that's exactly where it goes. When we know, that to me is the power of story. And so here we are. I mean, who wouldn't say yes to something like that? And
correct.
Yeah, I've shared my story. I've connected with them. I've shared my story, taking them to a much deeper level, and basically closed the deal. 2 minutes.
Wow. That's amazing, right? I mean, because a lot of the people who are listening to our podcast are in sales. We know that a lot of them are in the sales industry, that now having that story can give you that connection, that impact, and that transformational ability right there. And we all have stories. Again, it might be an everyday story. It might be a turning point story for all of our different stories. It doesn't always have to be this featured story that you have in your life, that we all have in that. Yet in your book, Transform Your Story, you talk about these sort of things, and and we love our lists here on our podcast. You have things in there like 5 simple steps to letting go of the past, 5 keys to finding your story so that you can impact people, 5 simple steps to using story to actually attract more customers in there. Tell us a little bit more about Transform Your Story and this book.
Well, Transform Your Story is really, it is a pretty detailed account of my story. But in that process, I didn't want people just to hear my story. I wanted them to really grasp that it doesn't matter what they have gone through, where they have been, that their story can be transformed by following some truly basic principles. And one of that is what we talked about earlier about forgiveness. There's no greater tool that will allow you to let go of your past than forgiving. It could be forgiving others. And often the very hardest thing, which certainly was for me, was forgiving myself.
Wow. Okay, Linda. So I'm not going to give them all. I'm not going to have you give them all of these steps and all of these keys. They can go find the book, Transform Your Story, which they can find on Amazon.
Yes.
Okay. Where else could they connect with you, though, if they want to go even farther? We have limited time to be able to have that opportunity to talk with you today. So if somebody wanted to learn more about you, if somebody wanted to connect with you on a deeper level or something, how can they find out more about Linda?
Okay. A couple things. One is if they want to hear my story in the nutshell, they may enjoy going to the TEDx on YouTube.
Yeah, we'll put that in our Facebook group to make it easy for them to be able to find.
Okay. Another way is I do a weekly video blog, or it's also on YouTube. You can go to my YouTube channel, Linda Olson. Wow,
Okay.
Stories. And something else I've started recently that I've had a lot of fun with in the last several months, and that is I'm putting together 5-day challenges. So in 5 days, say Monday through Friday, I will do a 1-hour Zoom call on a particular topic. And for example, I have one coming up on August 24th, and it's called Share Your Story So Others Will Listen. And every day I introduce a new concept. And it's just really fun. It's a great learning tool. We do it through Zoom calls. It's a great way to connect. And usually on those, it's only $17 to do that, to learn a lot of, get a lot of value.
Sure.
So that's a great way. And certainly through my website.
There you go. They can find all of this by going to your website. That'll lead them everywhere, right? And your website is?
wealththroughstories.com.
There you go. Mm-hmm. So folks, we know every one of you has a story out there. Linda, all of us at the Win, Make, Give team teared when Ben shared with us your story and said, this would be a powerful guest. And I know that some of our audience members, just hearing your story, just had their breath taken away. Yet the power of what you have been able to learn from it, and then the power you have been able to do to be able to share it and impact others, and then to be able to help all of us find our stories through your book, through your message, through hearing you, through your offers that you have on your website. We just really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join us here today and share that with our audience.
Oh, you're very welcome. It truly has been my pleasure. Anytime I can encourage or empower somebody to find their story. And just remember, if I can say this, that one, your story does matter, whether you recognize it at this time or not, and that storytelling is a skill. And so, we have to be patient with that process of really being able to do it and do it well.
All right. So folks, take the patience of finding your story. Take the patience of figuring out how to tell your story properly. Yet we know you all have a story and we want to hear your stories. So don't hesitate to take the moment, maybe record your story and share it with us in our Win, Make, Give group on Facebook, facebook.com/group/Win, Make, Give, where we will also be posting Linda's TED Talk for you. Until our next episode, make sure that you give us a review of this one. Make sure you've rated it. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss our future opportunities. And folks, remember, before our next episode, please wash those hands. Wear a mask if you think it's responsible. And as always, do good.